Good day, everybody, and it is good to be with you again on another Thursday afternoon. It's a rainy, bleak day, so it's a good day to do some Bible study. Today I want to look at Matthew 8:18 through 34. Matthew 8:18 through 34. This will finish up chapter 8 for us. So if you want to take a moment, go ahead and read that. Matthew 8:18 through 34. Okay, I'll assume you've read that text, so let me just give you some reading tips, I guess. I probably ought to reinforce this a little bit more, but some reading tips when you're thinking about reading a gospel. So a gospel is basically a historical biography. Thinking in terms of writing, think of like narrative style writing. It's telling a story. So the whole of Matthew is producing some kind of a retelling of the ministry of Jesus through the mind of Matthew. He's shaping this story for some reason like that. So we need to understand how an author is trying to communicate throughout that entire writing. So now the Gospels are seem to be stitched episodes. There's a lot of times we don't know for sure how much time has transpired between one part or the next. All the Gospels deal with a large chunk of the last week of or a large chunk of the Gospels for each of them deal with the last week of Jesus' life, and so that takes up quite a bit of space. So there's not a lot that we have concerning about the totality of the life of Jesus, but what we have is what was deemed necessary for us to have. So now Matthew 8 through 9, those chapters are interesting. There's a concentration of miracles within these two chapters. In fact, it's just miracle after another, it seems, except for one little episode where we have this dialogue with a couple of people that want to be disciples. Jesus talks to them basically about the cost of commitment. We're going to talk about that today. But there's a lot of miracles here, and it's as if authority seems to be a big idea. You remember when he came off of the mount from teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, the text says right at the end of chapter 7 that the people were astonished that he taught with authority. And so after that teaching discourse, he shows his power or his authority in miracles. He's going to exorcise some demons. He's going to have different types of miracles. It'll be healing miracles, and there's going to be a miracle that concerns a miracle over nature. And so there's a concentration here, and it's also preceding this concentration of miracles also has a introductory sense, I think, because chapter 10 is so interesting in that Jesus transfers this authority, or he gives the authority, not transfers because Jesus still has the authority, but he gives the authority to do all the things that he has done prior to this to his disciples. So there's this authority being transferred there and given to these disciples. All right, so let's look at Matthew 8:18 through 22 first. So it's not real hard to figure out what's going on here. It's basically a lesson about committed relationship, or committed covenantal relationship. Committed discipleship is what it's really about. And in any kind of covenantal relationship, whatever you want, you could be under the old covenant or the new covenant. There had to be a commitment that was associated with that covenantal relationship. So Jesus reinforces that here. Now, for some reason, Jesus wants to get away from the throng of the crowds. All the Gospels definitely show us that, or record for us, that people were drawn to Jesus in his early ministry for sure. Now later on he's going to be moving towards Jerusalem, and at that point things become a little bit different. But early on, while he's doing his Galilean ministry, people are drawn to him in significant ways. So anyway, he goes to the other side of the lake, and a scribe comes up to him. A scribe. So who is the scribe, I guess, is what we should be thinking about. I assume it's probably a Jewish religious leader. type of scribe. I wouldn't know any other reason not to, but a scribe itself generally can just mean a person who's able to read and write. However, these type of people are used predominantly by religious leaders. More so with the Sadducees than the Pharisees, though Pharisees did have scribes, though. But a scribe could be of the Pharisaic philosophy of Judaism or the Sadducean philosophy of Judaism. We just don't know. But anyway, we have this scribe that comes up to him, and generally we associate these people, especially later on, chapters 22 and 23, when Jesus encounters some of these folks. Again, things are not as pleasant, and so we kind of have a negative view. At this point, it seems to be that Jesus is open to this person coming to him. This person is drawn to Jesus himself. Now, this is about commitment, as I said. One thing about modern Christianity, I guess, is that I don't know if we stress the need for commitment nearly enough. Probably because we desire to have those people to be converted, I guess, as quickly as possible, so that we can say that we've done something, which is good. I mean, it's always good to have a Christian conversion. There's no doubt about that. However, I think the church really needs to understand that there has to be an understanding, an acknowledgement of the person who wants to become a Christian, that this involves a commitment. You have to prepare that person for the commitment that they are dedicating themselves to. I think repentance fits into that idea, even though repentance itself does not mean the idea of having commitment by itself. It could fall under that idea. And I think repentance fits that way because of this reason. Repentance in the Greek idea, it's a Greek word, the Greek understanding of the word is a little bit different than the Jewish. The Jewish is a little bit basic. It just means to turn. But it's always used in the context, in Hebrew anyway, it's always used in the context of a person's going the wrong way, they need to turn and go the other way, that idea. However, in the Greek idea, it has an acknowledgement of mental function, meaning that there is an awareness of knowing. After knowing is the idea. After you've learned something, you do things differently. And so when you're becoming, you want to become a Christian, you need to be taught. You need to be instructed that this is a commitment, and that it's not something that you walk away from, that you stay with it and stay true, and that God will never leave you. And so that's something that's really, really important to stress over and over. A lot of times people don't understand that this is a lifestyle. It's much more than just a confessional idea, confessional and a baptism. This is a lifestyle that goes with it. And so, committed Christians don't chase worldly values of, wealth mongering and power achievement and carnal improprieties, to say it in a nice way. We don't pursue worldly values. We follow the values that the Lord has given to us. And so we live differently, and our lives should show a pursuit of obedience. We'll never be perfectly obedient, but there should be a pursuit of obedience in our lives. So when we're actively engaged with the Lord, our life changes. And that would include corporate worship, an active prayer life, an active time in the Word with reflection time. All this would be important for us as a committed Christian as we're living our life for the Lord. Now, this scribe comes to Jesus. Now, a scribe, as I said before, is a highly educated person, probably a Jewish letter. Now, we don't know for sure. One thing about the scribe is we don't know if he stays or goes. We have no idea. We just kind of assume he left. But that's just not the way. That's not true. We don't know what he does. Jesus gives him a kind of a strange answer. Basically an answer that expresses as a whole the idea of discomfort. That this discipleship is not comfortable sometimes. And so you have to commit yourself, even though it's not always the most pleasant experience. Again, we don't know what the scribe did. Now the second person comes up. It says another of the disciples. This is really, really interesting. One thing about this passage is that we don't know if it's a disciple of Jesus or not. And early Christians didn't either. They tried to insert his behind disciples. We have some early manuscripts where they've inserted the Greek word for his there to try to express this as his disciples, meaning like Jesus' disciples. Or it could be the scribe's disciples. His doesn't really help us out too much, but maybe like going back to the Lord, the Son of the Man, and Jesus maybe. Maybe. We don't know. But anyway, his is not there. It was inserted by early Christians. It wasn't part of the earliest manuscripts. Didn't come along until later. It's not in our English translations. But we're not for sure where this disciple came from. Is he a disciple of Jesus? Maybe. Is he a disciple of the scribe? Maybe. I'm kind of inclined to think, since it's plural, that he's probably one of these first few groupings of disciples around Jesus. So, now here's the thing about the group. Matthew hasn't been involved yet, because Matthew doesn't even become part of the group till chapter 9. So Matthew's sharing all this secondhand knowledge, basically. He's getting this information somewhere else and sharing it with us. So, how large is the group? Well, we have a few that's been called, but we don't. We'll have a listing in chapter 10, but to that point, we don't have a listing, a complete listing. And so we don't have all of them here. But where did the disciple come from? Now, the thing about the burying. Okay, I'm going to go with the route that, I'm basing this on the way that Jesus responds to this. So the way that I talk about what's going on with the burial is based on the way that Jesus answers. Okay, and so Jesus is not being flippant here. I mean, he's not being sarcastic. He's not trying to belittle the person with a smart-aleck response. He's trying to make a statement. And I don't think he's trying to be, as I said, crass about it. So I'm going to base the idea of the burial, what's going on here, with the way Jesus responds. Now, there were two different types of burials back then. Basically, you had a burial that would be given to a wealthy person, and you had a burial that would be given to a poor person. The poor people were basically just buried outside the city somewhere. There was a shallow grave that was dug, and they were buried out there. They found evidence of this in archaeological digs. These graves. Now, I don't mean like shallow enough that they could be dug up by an animal, but not as deep as what we would think of, like 6 feet or so. And they found these places. Now, other people were buried in caverns. Sometimes these caverns are hewn out to be a little bit bigger. And the way that Jesus talks is, I think it's concerning this cavern type of burial. So what would happen in the cavern is this: when a person died, they would be laid in an area in the cavern itself, and that person would sit there in there decomposing for about a year. After about a year, the family would come back and they would collect the bones and they would put it in an ossuary box, and then the ossuary box would be placed in another area within this cave, this cave tomb. And so I am inclined to think that the disciples actually talking about going back and taking the Father's bones and putting them in the box and then moving them else. They only had one shelf for a body to decompose, or maybe 2 at the most. And so you basically, when a person died, they would get that, after a year, it would be decomposed fully. They would gather the bones, and then it'd be ready for someone else. So I think he's talking about going back and doing the second part of this, not the first part. And it's the way that Jesus answers makes me think that way. Now again, we don't know what the disciple says. In fact, what Jesus says in verse 22, follow me, that phrase right there, follow me, is the exact same phrase in Greek as he's going to use for Matthew. Exact same phrase. It's not the same phrase that he used with the original disciples, the earlier disciples, back in chapter 4. Not the same. It's a different wording, but it's the same wording that he uses for Matthew later. And again, we don't know what happened to the disciple here. We don't know if he left or stayed. But there is an idea of commitment that is definitely taught here, and it's reinforced over and over. Then we go on to the storm itself. If you look at verses 23 through 27, now what's going on here? It's not hard to see. I mean, it's just a short episode. What's going on here is that the disciples are failing to understand the full nature of Jesus. Now, the disciples have not recognized Jesus as of God, coming from God. They've not even recognized Jesus as the Messiah. That will not come up until chapter 16. So they're still learning things about Jesus. They haven't come to the point of recognizing his divine nature, his special status, or anything that way. They're still learning. So they are really, really amazed. Now, there are some entities that are recognizing the divine nature of Jesus, and those are the demons, and we'll see that coming up. But they are not. And so they are surprised that Jesus is able to calm the storms. Now, miracles over nature were not new in the Old Testament. In fact, I can think of a few of them that happened. We can think of Moses when he was in Egypt. He turned the river to blood, the Nile River. There was hail. There was a darkness time, meaning there's no sun, no light. There was he split the Red Sea. And so there were times that there were miracles over nature. Some other times, Joshua, there was a battle when Joshua asked God to stop the sun, and God did, to prolong the day. There's the prophet Elijah, who is able to call a famine upon the land. So there are, or a drought, I'm sorry. Elijah called a drought. But anyway, there are times when there were miracles over nature in the Old Testament. So it's not unique what Jesus does, but they are astonished at what he is able to do, for sure. And so, again, what the key is here is that they're not recognizing the true nature of Jesus, and thus they're not recognizing the full authority. They do call him Lord here, but it's not the idea of a special title of Lord is what we would think of as Christians. It's more like a polite way to address someone. It's the idea of Sir or Master here. So they've not recognized the full capability, full nature of Jesus yet. So they're astonished at what Jesus is able to do. All right, 28 through 34. Jesus is moving to another side of the lake. He went down, in this area would be east and towards the south of Galilee. That area was populated by Greek people. Greeks had conquered this area a long, long time ago. In fact, they had conquered Palestine too. The Romans came in and freed them from Greek rule. But anyway, the Greeks lived in this area. This would be the area of the Decapolis and other things. But anyway, Jesus goes over there. So this is a Gentile area. They have the swine. These two demon-possessed people men come. And there seems to be a large number of demons. But we don't know how many. There's no number given. So these men have plurality of demons. And Jesus casts them into the swine, and then the swine go down and drown in the waters, which I don't think really has too much significance. However, it is interesting at this time that Jesus is using his power in a way to help, yet it repulses people, and they ask him to leave the region. And so his miracle ends up having a different effect than it has before. In fact, this is the first time he met with a centurion. So he's encountered some Gentiles. But most of those times when people are drawn to him, it's Jewish people. In this instance, it was not. One thing about this whole episode, I would say, that kind of ties these things together is the idea of authority. The disciples have not recognized the authority of Jesus. And this is what's critical about this. He's been recognized as teaching with authority. Now he shows his authority over demons. He shows his authority over sicknesses, over any kind of ailments. And he will show more authority coming up. And so the cost of discipleship is about recognizing the authority of Jesus. And it has a higher authority. Following Jesus has a higher authority than all other things. And so it's a recognition of authority, and the disciples are not there yet, but they will get there as they develop. All right, we'll stop right there. I hope you enjoyed this time, and we'll pick up Matthew 9 next week, and I'll see you on Sunday. Have a good day.